Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we are talking all things Week 12, people. We have 11 weeks in the book, but still plenty more to go. We got those fantasy playoffs right around the corner. Need to lock down those playoff spots if you have not already. So have one of my usual guests here that I just love spending at least an hour of time with every 2 weeks, and that is Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. You can find him on Twitter at Dwain McFarland, aka Context Matters. Dwain, happy Week 12, man.
Man, I'm anything but The Rock. Like, I need to be doing more working out. I've not been good about that here lately. Yeah, man, I'm happy to join. Excited as always. I'm in some leagues where actually playoffs start next week. So it's like this last week determined who was in and who was out. So yeah, man, I'm ready.
It is time. We have no bye weeks this week, all 16 games to cover. I think there's 2 more teams on bye next week, and then they're just done. We have already reached that point in the season, everybody. So without further ado, let's get to these matchups. First up, we got Texans at Lions. Houston sitting as a 2.5-point favorite, over under at 51.5. So I want to point out that since Bill O'Brien was fired following week 4, we have had not one but 2 highly fantasy relevant wide receivers coming out of the Houston Texans passing game, which, hey, Dwayne, it makes sense, man. Deshaun Watson is a freaking baller. He is the highest graded PFF quarterback since Bill O'Brien exited the picture. And during this sample size, since then, we have had Brandin Cooks have 50 targets, Will Fuller 46 targets. Cooks has converted those into 37 catches, 496 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Good for the PPR wide receiver 12 in that stretch. Fuller 29 catches, 434 yards, and 4 touchdowns. PPR wide receiver 17. So this is one of these situations where just because Brandin Cooks is playing great doesn't mean that needs to take away from Will Fuller. Again, Deshaun Watson, absolute stud. It makes sense that he can enable more than one fantasy relevant wide receiver. He has done just that. And now removing Randall Cobb out of the picture, I understand people like Kiki Cootie. He's had some good games over the year. And hey, he's a good player. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but just realize when he had those big games, mostly in 2018 as a rookie, that was when Will Fuller was usually sidelined. And then that was making Cootie the number 2 wide receiver in his offense. He is by far the number 3 option. Hey, it's fine. 5-6 targets, I think, on the Thanksgiving, just DFS slate. If you want to, take a stab at him, I think on DraftKings only 3,300. That's fine in a 1-game setting, but just realize I think those 10 plus target games we saw in the past won't be there because it's the Brandin Cooks and Will Fuller show in Houston, and business is a booming. Dwayne, what's going on with the Lions, who maybe, just maybe, could get DeAndre Swift back after he got a limited practice in today?
Yeah, man, that's what we're hoping for. It's a juicy matchup from a standpoint of running backs. It's the second best fantasy matchup, right? The way that I calculate fantasy matchup. So it really sucked, right? For finally, it's like a Christmas gift that you unwrap, and it's like something, like you have some sort of like maybe it's a certificate saying, hey, you're going to get, a new Xbox, but you got to wait until March when they're in. That's how I felt about DeAndre Swift, right? Felt like a kid on Christmas morning who just got like the best gift ever, and I can't even play it yet. So yeah, man, hoping that Swift's in. Again, a juicy matchup. And just for folks that didn't, hear already or didn't read the utilization report or some of Ian's stuff last week, the week before, Swift, right, jumped off the page in his utilization. So 73% of the snaps, 66% of the dropbacks, 16% of the targets. I mean, the guy was out there in the 2-minute drill. He was out there in long down and distance. He was getting the short yardage. He was getting work inside the 5. They literally moved fully to DeAndre Swift. And it wasn't just a game script thing. So hopefully we'll get to see that. If you own any, maybe, right, we'll see Kenny Golladay. Let's see what happens with that as well. It's a great matchup for the receivers. This could easily be a shootout game. Golladay, I get it. Like if you're trying to make it into the playoffs, and let's see what goes on with his practice. But if he gets a full in, I got no problems getting Golladay, into the lineup, on Thanksgiving. Stafford didn't look great last week. They lost 20-0. But man, you want to have your best players out there, and I'm still waiting to get to use Kenny Golladay this week. So yeah, man, I think basically your Lions, you're starting all of them. If you've made it this far with them, you're not moving off of them against the Texans. It's a great matchup.
Yeah, certainly not a matchup for either offense to fear. I imagine this game will have most of the exposure on that Thanksgiving Thursday DFS slate. Next matchup on Thanksgiving, we got the Washington football team at the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys opened as 1-point favorites. That has jumped up to 3 points, seeing the over-under sit steady around 46. So last week, Dwayne, we were barking a little bit on Twitter about this, but Antonio Gibson finally outsnapped J.D. McKissic. by exactly 1 snap. So this was a situation where, look, they were able to get up on the Bengals. I mean, once Burrow went down, I believe it was the third quarter. I mean, we just knew it wasn't a game. Ryan Finley is objectively the worst starting quarterback in the NFL at this point. But because of that, we've seen this in past weeks against the Cowboys. The first time they played, Washington was able to get up, play a positive game script, and because of that, Gibson ended up being the clear-cut front runner. So, hey, that's great that Gibson has that in his range of outcomes, but no, we should not be expecting him to necessarily command this sort of role every single week. And honestly, even with McKissick's targets like dropping down to only 3 after he quite literally had the most targets in the NFL in weeks 9 through 10 inexplicably, it's just a situation, I think, where, Gibson only had 1 target in this game. Neither guy was just getting really fed in the passing game, which, hey, this is good. I think as we've seen in Carolina for stretches this year, it's better when your passing game flows through the wide receivers and their running backs. They're effective, but, shouldn't necessarily be your first read every single play. So it's okay that, the Washington football team offense can potentially enable both these guys. Just realize I'm not sure if we're going to get as fantasy-friendly game script moving forward where Gibson's going to be the lead back. So it's tough, man. They're facing the same Cowboys defense they had their way with. I will say the Cowboys have been playing a little bit better since then. They got rid of some of those free agent signings on the defensive line. I think the guys are generally just playing harder out there. Still not a matchup we should fear. I mean, Antonio Gibson, with him seeing 15-plus touches more weeks than not, top 20 option. McKissick, we can drop him down a little bit more into that RB3 role. But, man, I love the idea of making some stacks this week where if we expect the Ezekiel Elliott and Cowboys to be able to play with a little bit of a lead, then, hey, roll that back with J.D. McKissick, because we probably won't see a game where both Zeke and Gibson are just super set up for success, because both of them really need that positive game script to kind of have things go the way they want. So Zeke and running it back with McKissick on the other side, I love it on Turkey Day. Dwain, what is going on with the Cowboys?
Yeah, man, I like that idea. That'll be a little bit, less owned than what you'll see with Zeke and Terry McLaurin coming back the other way. So it's like you do that, or you do a Logan Thomas, something like that. I think that's what you got to do on a smaller slate like this. So I like that idea. Yeah, man, with the Cowboys, they look functional. You move Zach Martin out to right tackle from right guard, and basically Andy Dalton had a little bit of time this last week. Now the Vikings don't have a great pass rush, which the Washington does. So it's going to be a different test, right, this week for the Cowboys offensive line. So we'll see about Dalton and what goes on there. But like I said, it at least looked functional. And you saw CeeDee Lamb, out there for a route on 80% of the routes. That's a high, right, since all of this stuff happened whenever Andy Dalton became the quarterback, because they basically had to shut all of that down because anytime a quarterback dropped back, they were basically just getting sacked. So it's nice to see that they used the bye week to really rethink some things. They're trying to make the offense functional. They think they have a shot to win the division because nobody else wants it. So I think with the Cowboys right now, it's kind of a proceed with caution, Ian. I don't like the matchup against this defensive line, and Washington's been pretty good, but it looks like the Cowboys did make the right adjustment. So I think, it's going to be a positive for Zeke. It'll be a positive for Lamb. It's going to be a positive for everybody all the way around, right? We're not going to be back to where we were with Dak, but all of those guys, I think, are, besides Gallup, they're wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range. The one thing this week you could watch for is you could see Dalton Schultz really involved. The Redskins, haven't been great against tight ends. They're really kind of middle, right down the middle, right? But they've been pretty good against receivers, and obviously we talked about the pass rush, so there could be a sneaky play for Dalton Schultz, who's been out there. He ran like a route on like 90% of dropbacks or something crazy. So he's out there all the time, and Andy Dalton is willing to look his way.
Yeah, Dalton last week only pressure on 12% of his dropbacks in weeks 1 through 10, 35%. So yeah, if they can keep the Red Rocket upright, he can make some things happen with all those skill position weapons around him. It's a Thursday night matchup. Tentatively still expect to play. Ravens are having quite the COVID outbreak on their hands at the moment, but we have Ravens at the Steelers. Pittsburgh sitting as 4.5-point favorites. Game total is at 45. So, mentioning those COVID, outbreaks that have been going on in Baltimore, it's most specifically hit the running back room. Both J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram are going to unfortunately be missing this game. Incredibly unfortunate, because last week Dobbins really broke out, seized control of this backfield, played 63% of the offensive snaps, 15 carries. Ingram was at 8%, Gus Edwards at 21%. It was a moment we've been waiting weeks for, and similar to DeAndre Swift getting yanked away from us right when it was Christmas morning, as Dwayne alluded to. Similar situation here with J.K. Dobbins. So unfortunately not going to be free J.K. week, but hey, now we have Gus Edwards. I would just say that, we have a large sample size of Gus Edwards being the Ravens feature back. You go back in 2018 when they originally put Lamar Jackson in halfway through the year. Gus Edwards came in and was the feature back then as well. And we also have week 17 last year and a couple games without Ingram. All in all, it's been an 11-game sample size of him functioning as the Ravens starting RB. And it's been productive. He's averaged 16.3 rush attempts in those games. Just realize, the overwhelming majority, only in 3 of those 11 starts did he play even 50% of the offensive snaps. I would predict him to clear that mark in this one, but they trust Justice Hill. Justice Hill played 47 snaps in their AFC divisional round loss to the Titans. That was more than Ingram and Edwards combined. So if the Ravens get down against the Steelers, there is a realistic chance we could see Hill out there a bunch. Now, I'm still ranking Edwards as a top 20 RB this week. I get it, 15 to 20 touches inside the Ravens offense, that'll work. That's the volume we're looking for in RB2 land. But again, just sticking a little bit more with this DFS theme, which, hey, I got an article on the Thanksgiving Day DFS slate out coming on Wednesday. Should be up by the time you're listening to this podcast, so check that out if you're more interested. But I don't hate the, galaxy brain, just big tournament thought of going with Justice Hill because, again, they do trust him. Edwards is going to be awfully chalky, and I don't think if he's going to have that sort of touch ceiling that we're hoping for if this game gets away from the Ravens, which, the way they've been performing lately, I'm not so sure. So season long, yeah, you're starting Gus Edwards, no problem. Justice Hill isn't a season long option, even in that game against the Titans where he did outsnap these guys. He only had 5 or 6 targets and didn't even get a rush attempt. So it's the Gus Edwards show. But again, on a 3-game slate, we're trying to get a little crazy. Justice Hill might be on the field more than we think. Dwayne, quick expectations with Gus Edwards in this role, and then him with some Steelers goodness.
Yeah, I think, man, you hit it all. It sucks, right? The J.K. Dobbins, it is the exact same thing as DeAndre Swift. And it really was a breakout, right? This wasn't something where, the game script was just right. That's the kind of stuff I dig into for the utilization report each week, for the site, which it'll be out, early tomorrow morning. But, man, Dobbins was getting work across all the situations, right? He was in. A key thing I look at, Ian, is the first down utilization, right? And he was really gobbling all of that up. None of it was going to Ingram. None of it was going to Edwards. They just basically said, look, dude, it's yours. Just go with it. And he was seeing passing downs. He was seeing stuff inside the 5. He was seeing short down and distance. Everything you could ask for, basically. I agree with you on Justice Hill. He's going to be out there way more than what people expect. The Ravens just love to rotate players. Go look at Ravens snaps across all players except offensive linemen, right? They rotate tight ends, they rotate receivers, they rotate running backs. The quarterback and the offensive linemen are really the only things that stay out there all of the time. If you look at the rest of their positions, they rotate more than most other teams in the NFL. So you will see Justice Hill out there quite a bit. I expect him to handle the 2-minute offense. I expect him to handle the long down and distance. I think 4 to 5 targets is in play, maybe 6, 7 carries. I agree with you. He could pop a big one. Now, it's not a great matchup against, the Steelers, but they could also go contrarian knowing they just can't pound it right straight into the Steelers. Yeah. So, as far as, thinking about, the Steelers, only a couple things really to say about them. We've talked about James Conner last time, and it was kind of like, well, why is James Conner down? Who's taking this work? And you had even brought up how often they were running the empty sets. And so over the last 2 weeks, 77% and 63% of the snaps, the Steelers have had the lead, right? In those 2 games, they have thrown on 70 and 64% of their plays. They're just throwing. That's what they're doing. Their offense is a passing offense. They're letting Ben win the games. They're spreading the field out. And why not? You got Eric Ebron out there for over 90% of the snaps. You got Chase Claypool that's usually out there for about 80% of the routes. And then you got Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster out there pretty much the whole time. I didn't check the practice report today on Juju. I don't know if you saw anything on him, Ian.
He got up to limited, so he's on track.
Okay. Yeah, so it was a toe issue, and it was a weird deal. Like, he was just coming off the field, and it's like basically stubbed his toe, and then he was out for the rest of the game. So those are always weird. You're always concerned with a toe. And we've had a Juju toe issue before, right? And it bothered him early last season as well. So that's the big thing with the Steelers. James Conner is really your weekly question, right? Where we thought he would be a 20 touch per game guy, really he's turned into... He's kind of in that range like with Gibson and a lot of these other guys. I think a lot of people think of Conner and it's the name brand and they think, oh, no, he's up here. Really, like his utilization is down there with a lot of the guys that we struggle to predict every week. He's really going to be in that 10 to 15 touch range and you need a touchdown out of him. So Conner's a guy that I'm willing to put on benches where I need to, Ian, where I know I've got important games coming and I need to get a victory. I'm fine putting James Conner on the bench if I've got another option.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, for James Conner fantasy football managers, but you watch this Steelers offense, you can see why they want to throw the ball to the wide receivers as much as they've been doing. Dwayne, last thing on this game. So when they played in week 8, Deontay Johnson, he had a hamstring nick in like the first quarter, but he ended up playing 77% of the offensive snaps. So we just kind of, everyone loves Deontay Johnson. I love we all love Deontay Johnson. So we've been throwing that game out a little bit and saying he was hurt, but he was out there for, again, 77% snaps and been playing ever since. Only 3 targets. So, if we got him right next to Claypool in the DK pricing, Juju's a little bit cheaper. We know Juju's playing through the pain. Just straight up this week, do you want Deontay or Claypool?
Yeah, I want Claypool straight up this week. Just because
I'm with you.
They do more with him as far as moving him around. I mean, Deontay Johnson's been great, but Claypool just gets more protection from the scheme and the things that they do. And he also is the guy that gets more of the looks, right, as far as, the deep throws as well as opportunities in the end zone. And he gets involved a little bit in the rushing game too.
Yeah. Tricky to, gotta be careful trusting a 1-game sample size like this. But yes, I do think all things equal, we're trying to take down that tournament. Give me Chase Claypool at pretty much equal cost against Deontay this week. Now on to the Sunday matchups. We got the Los Angeles Chargers at the Buffalo Bills. Bills sitting at 6-point favorites, over under up from 50 to 53.5 because the Chargers and the Bills to an extent pretty much cannot play a game without their opponent shooting out. So expecting a bunch of points in this one. It is one of, the highest totals of the week. I believe Raiders Falcons is number 1, but this one is up there. Maybe, just maybe, we get Austin Eckler back this week, people. He has been active. His practice window has been activated, so we're expecting to see him out there. Still might be a week early. We'll see. But, the guy's been posting videos for weeks now of him running and doing weights and all that. Just an absolute beast. And I'm excited to get Eckler back and in this version of the Chargers offense because we go back to, the preseason, the big debates about Austin Eckler. Oh, is he really a 3-down back? Is he someone that's going to be able to overcome an offense that maybe has Tyrod Taylor not throwing the ball to his running backs as much? Or, is he going to suffer from having a rookie in there? Well, if we fast forward 11 months, now we know that rookie has been one of the most productive rookies through the air in NFL history. And this is suddenly just an offense that has no competition in at the running back room. Whereas before we were worried about Justin Jackson, people were actually questioning whether Joshua Kelly could overtake Austin Eckler, which, we'll save that rant for another day. But, I think Eckler is walking back into, one of the most fantasy friendly situations we could ask for. If he is at 100% getting his usual workload, he is going to be a legit top 5, if not top 3 option at the RB position going the rest of the way. The things this guy can do as a receiver are absolutely outrageous. And that's as a rusher. I mean, he was racking up more broken tackles than just about anybody in the early part of this season. So, I've seen some people say, oh, Eckler comes back, he might, be in that RB2 range. If Eckler comes back, he's a top 5 RB at the position. Again, I feel like sometimes that undrafted free agent thing just falls guys around their entire career. Like all Eckler has done since being in the NFL is function as one of the league's most efficient players at the position. He can run, he can catch, the guy can do it all. And I hope you all kept him on the bench or in the IR spot because if it's not this week, it's coming soon. And Austin Eckler is going to be a fantasy star down the stretch in 2020. Dwayne, what's going on with the Bills?
Yeah, man, with the Bills, we're going to have to watch the practice report. We're going to have to see what happens with John Brown, right? There was a report that it might have been a high ankle sprain. I was actually watching the game when that play happened. I was originally worried that it was his knee, the way that he had landed. But Brown had really been getting a lot of targets, man. I mean, he had seen 9-10 targets per game in this offense. Like you said, it goes into a shootout mode. It seems like almost every single game. It's one of the highest point totals on the slate. So I think the two guys to watch, right, if for some reason John Brown can't go, is to watch for Gabriel Davis, who's really been playing in all of the 10 personnel groupings. He's looked really good. He could see more work. He had a game earlier in the season when John Brown was out where he had 9 targets. And then you've got Cole Beasley, right? And Beasley's just been really, a little bit up and down, but he's had a 13 target game, which was the last game against the Cardinals. And then he had a 12 target game in week 7. So Beasley's certainly capable. And in some of those weeks where John Brown was out, it was 6 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, 6 targets. So, I mean, that's pretty solid. And if he's got an upside to get to 10 or 11, Beasley's a guy that you can feel pretty good about putting in your lineup. The touchdown's a little more iffy for him. The big plays aren't as great, but man, he can be a PPR monster. So just remember both of those guys. The one other thing I'm interested in seeing, a lot of these teams, right, have come out of their bye and they've really made some changes, right, with their teams. We talked about the Cowboys. We've heard about some of these other running backs. I'm really interested to see what they do with Zach Moss because, if you look at Moss, you look at Singletary, they've just been hovering right around equal. It started off where Singletary was ahead, Moss got injured, he came back, and now they're really dead even, like I said. But I think Moss is the guy that carries really the broader skill set, right? He can catch passes, he can block, yeah, he doesn't make tacklers miss as much, but he runs with more power. He can run inside. He can run outside. I'm interested to see, does Zach Moss really become the latest rookie to join J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, where maybe he's going to get 65, 70% of the work? And if he does in this offense, that's going to be really good for folks who have hung on to him.
Yeah, last 7 games the Chargers are played in, 69 points, 57, 68, 61, 57, 50, and most recently 62. So even if Moss doesn't get that breakthrough in usage, I mean, he's been touchdown-dependent RB3. Seems like the touchdowns could be flowing for everybody involved in this shootout. Next matchup, we got Titans at the Colts. Colts sitting as 4.5-point favorites, down to 3.5. Game total up from 49.5 to 51. So I'm sitting on my couch watching, the games on Sunday. It's about 3:45. I've received, DMs, maybe even a text from an angry family relative or two about just, hey, Ian, what's happening to A.J. Brown? Where's A.J. Brown? What's going on with A.J. Brown? I don't know, everyone. I was more pissed off than you were at that point in the game. And then A.J. Brown came back with the touchdown of the season. Absolutely ridiculous. Caught like a freaking 5-yard in. Had no less than 4 guys around him. Didn't even matter. Broke all the tackles. Jeremy McNichols tried to, push him in. It didn't freaking matter. It's A.J. Brown. Everybody. And we just look at this season he has put together. It's like, it would make sense at this point if we did see a dud game out of A.J. Brown because, I've called him a boomer boom wide receiver, a little bit ironically, but that's kind of what we're looking at now because my goodness, man, he had the week 1 game where he only had 5 catches for 39 yards, was clearly playing injured because he missed, the next 2 games they had. And since then, he has scored in every single game except week 10 against the Colts. And now he gets his chance to have revenge. He had a 70-yard potential bomb touchdown in that game, hit him in the chest, unfortunately fall to the ground. We've seen him have a little bit of dropsies issues in the past 2 weeks. Not something he, struggled with in 2019 or in the earlier parts of the season. Keep going back to the well. AJB wide receiver 1 season is alive and well. And I will say Corey Davis keeps on balling as well. So I really, every week I do the game by game breakdown pod on a Sunday night, and I almost didn't even talk about Corey Davis because I'm just, so biased towards A.J. Brown these days. But hey, 113 yards on his own. Right when we got to the point that we were trusting Corey Davis as a wide receiver 2, he goose-egged us in week 9, but then he's come back with, back-to-back 5-catch efforts. So, similar to A.J. Brown, like it's okay for a great wide receiver to have a down week here or there. It happens to everyone across the league. Don't be afraid to go back to both Davis and Brown in fantasy leagues of all shapes and sizes. Dwayne, again, just happy AJB wide receiver 1 season, man, and then hit me with some Colts.
Man, always happy for AJB season. I'm always on board with that. So, hey, let's just continue on with the theme here, right? Rookie running backs. Another guy that we saw that maybe, let's hope, right, got on track last week. That was Jonathan Taylor. The 3 weeks before, it was terrible, Ian. I mean, it was really bad. It was the point where you couldn't play him, right? 34%, 31%, and 24% of the snaps. As far as his rushing attempts, he had seen 11, 6, and 7. Well, he comes out this past weekend, 22 attempts. That's 50%, for the team. 55% of the snaps, 35% routes, 13% of the targets. So that's 4 targets, which is really solid. The other thing I really like that I'm seeing that's the most encouraging for me, right, when you dig in a little bit deeper, 60% of the long down and distance work he's getting, and that's been over multiple weeks. So here are his last 4 games in long down and distance: 100%, 67%, 50%, and 60% of the snaps, right? So they trust him out there in pass pro. They trust him out there whenever they need him, to catch a ball. They're still going to go with Naheem Hines in the 2-minute offense. That's always going to be his. You're probably going to see Jordan Wilkins still sprinkled in here or there, but I think Taylor may have done just enough, Ian, to really just kind of limit that Wilkins, role, and hopefully he can take over the majority, of this backfield. When I say the majority, like I said, it's still going to be 3 guys, but if he can stay around that 50 to 60% mark, right, for his attempts each week, if he can pick up 3 to 4 targets, we know you've got a good offensive line. This is a team that's usually in the game. They've got a decent defense, and they really don't have a star right now. Like, there's nobody they can lean on. They're spreading it around everywhere. Michael Pittman could be coming on as well. I wrote about him last week in the utilization report if folks want to see that more. But for right now, I mean, Jonathan Taylor is the guy that right now I'm still considering him. He's an RB2 anyway, right? He's like RB16 on the season despite all of his issues. That's just how crazy the running back season has been this year. But I think you got to put him in the RB2 conversation, low end. Yeah, he could still cause you some problems, but this weekend you've just got such a juicy matchup, right? You got Tennessee, which is a plus 4.5 points in PPR to running backs. So backs playing Tennessee average 4.5 points more than what they usually do. when they play the Titans. So Jonathan Taylor's a guy that, it's going to be really hard to keep him out of your lineup this week. And maybe we are crossing that line where they're finally just going to let this guy run.
Hines is going to be in there. He's going to be involved in the 2-minute situations, as you said. But if we can get Wilkins just to chill out and give us his 2 RB backfield, please. Yes, I agree with you. We could have a nice little ending stretch here for Jonathan Taylor. Panthers at Vikings next game up. We got the Vikings sitting as 4-point favorites. Over/under sitting at 48.5. So Mike Davis, just keep it coming, everyone. I understand that we had those down weeks before, but had that just great spot against the Lions last week. And we told you on the show, just go back to him as the RB1 because that's exactly what his usage has really been all season. And you look at the bust games, in week 7, week 8, and week 10, he finished as, the RB30, RB32, and RB30 just in PPR weekly scoring. But those games, they were just weird situations. They only ran 52, 43, and then 47 plays. They average over 61 plays per game on the season. So it was just these games where you don't really see anybody getting the work. We were talking about James Conner earlier and some of the bad games he has. Similar to Conner, when Mike Davis has had the rough games, it's not because, we have Rodney Smith or Trenton Cannon or one of the other running backs taking away his usage. No, it's just been a matter of usually the offense isn't doing what it needs to do. And, the Panthers defense is kind of getting blown out. So it's a good team. We saw that PJ Walker can go out there and, not tank the offense. I think, he's going to have rougher days ahead of him. Wasn't, a flawless performance or anything like that. But sounds like Teddy's going to be back soon enough anyway. And look, just realize that Christian McCaffrey, when he's in there, obviously it's, a top 3 running back in the entire league. McCaffrey's actually averaging more fantasy points per game in 2020 than he did in 2019, which is absolutely wild. No small sample size, but still wild. But Mike Davis, hey, he's not Christian McCaffrey, but that's okay. He doesn't need to be. He's still a top 10, top 12 fantasy RB as long as CMC remains sidelined. Dwayne, what's going on with the Vikings?
Yeah, man, we're seeing the Vikings from a passing standpoint, right? You saw Adam Thielen get back on the board. You saw Justin Jefferson continue to do his thing. So if you look at Adam Thielen over the last 3 games, he's got 6 end zone targets and seemingly comes down with all of them. The guy just is making some great catches. CeeDee Lamb had a really awesome catch early in that game where he had to really, from a body adjustment standpoint, it was amazing what Lamb did. And then basically Thielen came out and just basically one-upped him. Said, hey, watch this in the back corner, one-handed, toe tap, I'm going to get it in and we're going to score the touchdown. And then, Jefferson is really just continuing to be the field stretcher. So if you look at him over the last 3 games, 308 air yards, a lot of this coming off of play action, which we've talked about before. So this season, a play action pass is worth 12% more than a regular pass to wide receivers. So that gives you an idea. It's not huge, but hey, if you can get a 10th extra, right? And for some teams, it's worth a lot more than others. And Minnesota is one of those so for Minnesota, if you look at them, you look at Cleveland, you look at the teams that are really heavy, in the running game and using play action. When the quarterbacks have accuracy, it can be worth even more. It can be like an additional 25% per target. So those guys, even though their volume isn't as good as some other players, their efficiency remains really high. So they're guys you're going to continue to start. Not a great matchup this weekend against Carolina. Technically speaking, Carolina is the worst matchup for quarterbacks from a fantasy perspective, in the way that I calculate it. And it's funny because it's not like a defense when you look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, they're getting all these sacks and they're forcing all of these turnovers. It's just really more of this bend but don't break, kind of defense, which is pretty amazing considering what all they've gone through and how much of a change they've had bringing in a new coaching staff and everything else. So Cousins is a guy, is going to be up and down because if they can rely on the running game with Dalvin Cook, right, who's a beast, they're going to do that. But in the games where they are forced to throw, it just shows you, right, that Thielen and Jefferson can both be supported. And so they're guys that you just pretty much, Ian, you got to just put them in your lineup, right, and just roll with it each week. I know most people are going to start Thielen every week, but I've gotten to where I'm just that way with Jefferson, right? If I have him on a team, I just put him in there, and because I don't want to miss the big week. I know I'm going to have the 9 and 10 point games, but I don't want to miss on the 30-pointers.
So just got a tweet out from NFL Network's Tom Pelissero. So Adam Thielen has tested positive once and negative once for COVID-19. So chance it could be a false positive. We'll see, but he's on the COVID list right now. So it seems like he has a chance to play this week. Real quick, Dwayne, just kind of knee-jerk reaction. If Thielen is out, how high are you ranking Justin Jefferson this week?
Oh, he'll be in my top 12 for sure,
100%.
If that happens. And I think Irv Smith moves into the conversation for tight end 1, as well. He's recovering from a growing injury, but we had seen before that occurred, right, again, this year where we just can't seem to have many good things, right? I'm ready for this year to be over. But if you look at Irv Smith before, that growing injury, like he was slowly growing. He had gotten to the point where he was running a route on pretty much like 70-75% of the dropbacks. Really, he had eliminated, the competition with Kyle Rudolph, who was really staying in the block more. And so if he's healthy, we could see him, really work his way into maybe 15-20% of the targets.
Yeah, we've even seen them willing to put Irv Smith out in the slot and just out wide as a true wide receiver for 10-plus snaps a game. I'm with you. I think Irv, not B.C. Johnson, not Chad Beebe, not any of these other guys would be the main beneficiary from Thielen being out. Next matchup, we got the Browns at the Jaguars. Cleveland sitting at 6.5-point favorites with a game total of 49. Look, Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, they both somehow managed to jump over other humans in the same game, which is just absolutely insane to me. And last week was kind of like the only tough matchup they really, truly have remaining. They got the Ravens in week 14, but other than that, we got the Jaguars this week, the 27th ranked defense in PPR points per game allowed to RBs. Titans in week 13, who ranked 24th. Mentioned the Ravens, they ranked 14th. And then Giants, who ranked 25th, and the Jets, who ranked 26th on Championship Sunday in week 16. So, last week, I realized Hunt, I think he only had 13 yards on his 13 carries, like wasn't good other than the one awesome touchdown he had. So Chubb, was just a guy looking like a complete monster out there. But look, both these guys likely top 10, if not top 5, real life backs in fantasy land. They're not too far off that as well at this point, particularly when they can play with this sort of positive game script. So in this post OBJ version of the offense, Chubb and Hunt are their best two playmakers. And credit to Coach Kevin Stefanski for realizing that, really run the entire offense through his backfield. It's been successful. Browns are 7-3. They've been playing with, just some awful weather. So I don't want to say that they've done it completely without Baker Mayfield, but hey, man, he actually has been worse than he was over the past 2 years so far. But whatever. Right now, I'm just complimenting Hunt and Chubb. Fire up both these guys. We can, like to your point, like Chubb is your Adam Thielen, but I think Kareem Hunt, is your Justin Jefferson of this. Like, you got to find a way more weeks than not to get these guys in your fantasy lineup, particularly Chubb. And man, like if Kareem Hunt's not in there, you better have just a bunch of top, true top 10 options ahead of him, because again, there's more than enough opportunity to go around in this backfield, which is rare to see, but that is the reality we have in Cleveland. Dwayne, what's going on with Jake Luton and just a Jaguars team that gets more sad by the week?
Yeah, man. Hopefully we'll see Minshew back, but even if Minshew's healthy, who knows what they're going to do? So we'll have to wait and see. But here's the thing I would say to folks: just don't forget DJ Chark. Right? He had a tough matchup. And then he's had some weather, that he's had to deal with, and, in the game 2 weeks ago, but he's still out there. He's still seeing, targets. The offense has just been a little bit off track. So Chark, before, the tough matchup and before the weather became an issue, remember those 3 games before, he had 488 air yards, and that's not gone. That's still there. So Chark still gives you wide receiver 1 upside every week. If your league still has, trade, if your trading is still open and you're in a season-long league, if he's a guy that you can go target and get, I'm not saying go pay a ton for DJ Chark because we don't love the quarterback situation, but if you've got somebody where he's just sitting on their bench, they're not using him, and you've got a part you can give away, DJ Chark's the kind of guy that I like to target. And if Minshew does happen to come back and be the quarterback moving forward, he and Chark, they work great together. So you'll potentially have a wide receiver 1 on your hands for the rest of the season. I do think Chark has that in his range of outcomes if Minshew's back as the quarterback. The only other guy to mention here, right, is just James Robinson. This guy's just insane, Ian. Like, it's just every week, right? You keep waiting. It's like, oh, Divine Ozigbo's coming back. Are they going to work him into the mix? Nope. 0 carries. Chris Thompson, was out this week due to an injury. So they had Dario Agunbowale was available to them, and he played some of the passing down snaps, but James Robinson 100% of the attempts. So here are his attempt shares over the last 4 weeks: 92%, 96%, 92%, 100%. It really doesn't get better than that. He also took 100% of the snaps in the 2-minute offense this past week with Chris Thompson out, and he's not being used as much on the long down and distance. That's where they're working in some of these other guys. But hey, in this year, in this economy, Ian, hey, you'll take everything you can get from James Robinson. Had a few tough matchups, but man, you just got to keep plugging him in, guys. 71% of the snaps, this guy's out there all the time. He's getting all the carries. And again, another guy that I just want Minshew to come back, man. I know Minshew's not great, but he's good for fantasy football. He keeps the team, slinging the ball around. He just helps them move the chains more. So really hoping that Minshew comes back. That helps everybody here.
Yeah, I'm with you. Robinson made the most out of that, really impossible spot against the Steelers. And don't forget, in that Week 10 game against the Packers, had not one but two 15-plus yard touchdowns nullified by penalty. So don't get it twisted. Even if the Jaguars, are one of the stinkers of the entire league, James Robinson continues to play great on a week-to-week basis. Next matchup, just a doozy right here. We got the Giants at the Bengals. New York sitting as 5.5-point favorites, opened at 4.5, over-under down from 45 to 42.5. So Wayne Gallman, I think we actually can really trust him in this spot. When Joe Burrow was going to be there, I maybe would have been a little bit less off it because I could have seen, him and the Bengals actually building a lead here. But hey, Devontae Freeman, he's going to be on IR for at least another week. And even though Alfred Morris is annoyingly involved, going back to Week 10, it was Wayne Gallman at 58% snaps, Alfred Morris at 22%, and Dion Lewis at 19%. Gallman has 18 carries, but Morris stole 8 of them. Dion Lewis stole 2 targets. This is not, a Saquon Barkley or even, what the Rolf Freeman was seeing before he got hurt. It's a little bit different, but hey, this is, the sort of positive game script spot where Gallman could continue to thrive. To his credit, he scored 5 times in his last 4 games. In the post-Barkley backfield, I think he has, looked like the best back in New York, better than Dusty Devontae, and Dion Lewis hasn't done much all season long. Alfred Morris is doing his thing, I guess. But look, Gallman is a starting running back. He's the lead running back there. And, I usually make my rankings on Wednesday morning, but I think it's going to be hard to keep him out in that top 20 once I get there, man, because it's a great matchup. Best case scenario matchup we could ask for against a Bengals team that, I don't want to say they're going to be quitting out there, but you got to think motivation is running a little bit of a low point there without having Burrow. I'm curious on your thoughts about Ryan Finley because, again, I truly do think he is the worst starting quarterback in the league at this moment. And because of that, it's good to have this, not the workhorse running back on the other side, but close to a bell cow in Wayne Gallman. So go with Wayne. Wide receivers, pretty up in the air. I think Sterling Shepard's your safest bet there. And Evan Ingram's, been getting fed more weeks than not in the past. So, Daniel Jones, hey, if he runs, he can be usable. But I think more than anything, Wayne Gallman's really the only guy I'm excited about from this Giants offense. And even then, we're pinching pennies a little bit here. Dwayne, hit me with some Ryan Finley and Bengals goodness.
Man, I felt good. Like, I was going to start with the positive, right? I was going to start with the positive that T. Higgins had a season high in routes, 92%. Saw 10 targets. I had talked about it on Twitter, a little bit before the game, that I thought this was the week where T was going to finally hit the 10 target mark. He had just been slowly chipping away little by little. He had already been, people know he had already been great, but he had just been chipping away towards that 10, target mark. I just didn't know 4 of them were going to come from Finley, of which none were catchable. And one of them was intercepted. So as far as Finley goes, yeah, man, I'm with you. I went back and watched some of that. It was very hard to watch. I watched him some last year. It was really bad. I know they promoted Brandin Allen, but really, what does that do? Like, it's almost the same. Maybe he's slightly better, right, than Finley, but it's really problematic, man, and it stinks. 2020 continues. You lose Joe Burrow. This really dampens the outlook of T. Higgins for the rest of the season. It does dampen Tyler Boyd. Now, Finley did feed Boyd last year down the stretch, and Boyd remained viable, right? It wasn't a super efficient offense, but he did continue to catch passes, so you've got that going for you. While Finley was in, 29% of the targets went to T. Higgins, 14% went to AJ Green, 14% to Boyd, and 14% to Sample. And one other odd twist, as only the Bengals or the Bungles can do, Ian, all of a sudden, Gio, if I said, hey, Ian, what kind of back is Gio Bernard? Like, what would you say?
Scat back.
Yeah, he's a scat back. He's a receiving back, right? He's there to catch passes. No, he's not. That's what Samaje Perine is for. Samaje Perine, 83% of the long down and distance and 63% of the 2-minute work. You can't make this up. Like, Gio, the coaching staff talks about what a great receiver he is and how they got to get him on the field and why he's always been a hindrance to Mixon. And now all of a sudden, Samaje Perine, are you kidding me? Now he is the guy you want to have out. So it really sucks, man. The loss of Burrow and now this splitting time with Samaje Perine in the most critical situations where really Gio, if you were using him, that's where he was earning, that's where he was earning you his fantasy points, really more through the passing game. And now he's not going to be involved with that. I mean, Gio basically, even while Mixon's still out, is almost unstartable for me at this point, right? It's like a double whammy for him, so that really stinks. But man, that's enough on the Bengals. I could give you some more, but that's already too much. Like, you should have already just cut my mic off.
That's all we needed, man, because look, I went through this backfield today and I saw Samaje Perine snaps creeping up, but I don't dig quite as deep into every situation as you do in your utilization report. And that's why the utilization report is one of the most actionable pieces on the freaking internet, man. That's great stuff there. It doesn't make any sense why the Bengals are doing that. But for me, like Gio was the last guy. I mean, I called him, a low ceiling RB3, so I wasn't exactly, all over him, but he was the last guy that I thought maybe we could start. No, that's out the window. We're not starting any Bengals this week. And until further notice, we got to see something out of this offense. Last year in 3 Finley starts, 13 points, 10 points, 10 points. Stay away. We're done. Sorry for talking so long about them, everyone. Next matchup, Cardinals at the Patriots. Started as a pick 'em. Now we got the Cardinals as 2-point favorites, over under up from 48 to 49.5. So, can Kyler Murray overcome this Patriots defense that, let's face it, hasn't been the same, world-beating unit in 2020, even getting Stephon Gilmore back last week, really couldn't slow down Deshaun Watson throughout that game. So, yeah, my answer is yes, Kyler Murray and company should be just fine. I mean, last week, he threw for 269 yards and a pair of scores against the Seahawks, because who doesn't throw for multiple scores against the Seahawks? But surprisingly, only 15 rushing yards. So maybe I was thinking that could it be a situation where the Patriots do know what it takes to slow down mobile QBs? Not really. I mean, Lamar Jackson, 51 rushing yards when they played this year. Last year had 61 and 2 touchdowns. Deshaun Watson had 36 rushing yards in his score last week. Josh Allen has scored, in 2 of his 3 games against the Patriots over the years, and he had 43 rushing yards in the other one. So, Murray, like, you watch this dude play, man, like, so many of his rushing yards are just out of scrambles. I think that's what's kind of making him so freaking hard to game plan for, and you see that happening. And look, I mean, the floor is just out of this world, man. This year, only 4 players have more than 115 fantasy points from purely rushing production. Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Dalvin Cook, and Kyler freaking Murray. Somehow the passing usage and stats, that's just like icing on the cake, man. Kyler Murray would pretty much already be a QB1, even if we hardly counted his passing production. So, I have him as my number 1 overall quarterback of the week. He's been it all year, deserves to continue to be it. Hopkins against Gilmore. Hey, it's DeAndre Hopkins. He can win against anybody, soothe the expectations. And then McKinnon, Drake, and Chase Edmonds, they are splitting snaps right now, people. I'm still getting a bunch of Chase Edmonds start-sit questions. It's going to be a sit for me most of the time because, hey, we'll have times like last week where he's able to convert, one of those 6 or 7 touches into a lucky score. I mean, it was a lucky score. Let's be honest. No one guarded the guy. He's the second most wide open touchdown of the year per next gen stats. So nothing against Chase Edmonds, but while it's this split, Drake is, kind of this like upper end RB3, just getting his 15 rush attempts. But other than that, it's really tough. So, hey, keep going back the well with Kyler. He is set to freaking ball as he always does, because nobody can freaking catch this short, fast dude. Dwayne, what's going on with Cam Newton?
Gotta love the short, fast quarterbacks. Yeah, man. Cam, he's in a decent spot this week, right? They're going to have to throw the ball. They're not going to be able to. The Patriots, the way they want to win football games right now is they want to slow things down. They want to keep it where they can have Damian Harris on the field and they can just pound on people. But Kyler Murray's not going to allow that to happen, right? That's just not going to happen with the Cardinals. So he's going to have to drop back to throw. That's going to be a good thing for Jacoby Myers. I know he had a little bit of a bump in the road this last week, but his routes, everything were still there, right? He's still operating from the slot. Also saw a little bit of maybe, I'm going to call this a maybe. Like this guy, it's popular to have a redacted list. This guy's almost on my redacted list, but it's, N'Keal Harry. 84% of the routes. He saw 22% of the targets. He worked from the slot 47% of snaps. And that's really important for Harry because if you go back and you think about his game in college, right, he was a guy that struggled to beat press coverage, right, when he faced better cornerbacks. He really wasn't that great on the outside, other than catching back shoulder fades, where he could trap it to his body. But really, he's an after the catch kind of guy, right? He does have a little bit of, almost like an Anquan Bolden-esque kind of quality to his game. I'm not calling him Anquan Bolden. But if you can get him into space and you can let him operate from situations where he can win, I think that's helpful to him. And so it's interesting to see if they keep using him a little bit more, in the slot and they move, Myers outside a little bit, more often. I think Harry could end up having some value down the stretch. He was a first read on 86% of his targets. The other guy, obviously, we've got to talk about here is really just the backfield, right? Overall, you got Burkhead, who's out. He was lost for the game. Damian Harris did his normal thing. I know there was a lot of talk on Twitter beforehand. Oh, Damian Harris is in a smash spot. Damian Harris is never in a smash spot. Why? Because anytime a game script slightly goes wrong, like his day is screwed. And so you don't get if guys are in a situation where they're sharing with three or 4 or 5 other guys, it's never a smash spot. It could be a good matchup and maybe things go well, right? But in a situation like this, you just don't know what's going to happen. It could be great. They come out and they lead, they keep the game close. In those situations, he gets the ball. So if you look at Damian Harris's snaps over the last 3 weeks, if they're trailing, he only plays 32% of the time. If the game is within 3 points, he plays 51% of the time. If the team is leading, and this is what sucks, this kind of caps his upside, he's only playing 50% of the time. So really his role is capped. Now it will be interesting. What's going to happen now with Rex Burkhead gone? He could see a little bit, he could see his role increase, right? Which would be great. But you still have to deal with Cam Newton really being the goal line back. And so it still kind of keeps a damper on things. But I will leave room for Damian Harris to have some slight upside for the remainder of the season. Or the Patriots could just put Sony Michel in Rex Burkhead's role. It's funny because if you think back to Michel at Georgia, he was really known as the guy that was more of the passing down back, right? And Nick Chubb was the guy banging it out between the tackles and running the wide zone stuff. And so we know that Michel in his past has shown a capability to be used in ways other than a two-down banger. So it'll be interesting if they just try to put him in the Burkhead role. Now, James White saw quite an increase, 57% of the snaps, 22% of the targets. He only handled 19% of the rushing attempts. That's not his gig, right? But 100% of the 2-minute offense and 100% of long down and distance. And that's all the Patriots were in. They were having to try to hurry up, to catch up, and they were in long down and distance quite often this last week. So James White, if you look at it, 21 snaps in the fourth quarter to 5 for Damian Harris. So it's really a backfield, man. If you can, just avoid it. I'm still not certain what's going to happen with Burkhead out. It's probably going to just remain 3 backs again. And plus, like I said already, Cam Newton's just sitting in the way, man.
Yeah. If anyone's going to emerge as the winner, I do think it's James White. We've seen historically him have real nice on-off splits with Burkhead, but to your point, really don't know what's going on. And obviously this Cam Newton offense, quite different than the one we saw, White having that role in with Brady over the years. Next matchup in the AFC East, Dolphins at the Jets. Dolphins sitting as 7-point favorites, 44-point over-under. Just another doozy of a game here. So I want to talk about this backfield situation because Salvon Ahmed has been someone that's really been getting fed like a feature back over the past 2 weeks. Even saw him get 6 targets last week after we didn't know if he had that in his game. And with Matt Breida coming back, we just didn't know what it was going to be, and it was still the Salvon Ahmed show. But, update from Barry Jackson, who's a solid Dolphins beat writer, who said, quote unquote, for those who have asked, RB Myles Gaskin, who has missed 3 games with a sprained MCL, is doing well in his recovery. Not sure Dolphins necessarily will activate him this week, but we'll see. Should be back very soon, now eligible to come off IR. So not a ton of new information, but it does kind of match the just idea that this is not, an injury that's going to keep Gaskin on IR for the entire season. And I would just say, everyone, push the brakes on Salvon Ahmed. I mean, some of these guys I just got, search Twitter to try to find some new information on him from a beat writer or whatever, but I end up seeing, other kind of fancy takes while I'm scrolling through this. And the amount of stuff I've seen talking about how Salvon Ahmed is just broken free in this backfield and he's the alpha and he's done all this stuff. Calm down. Look, I watch every game and I'm looking at the metrics too. I understand, the metrics need to back up what we're seeing on film. And never once in watching all these Salvon Ahmed snaps I've been like, wow, now that's the guy the Dolphins really need to build their offense around the rest of the year. He's fine, but calling him anything more than average, I think, is a disservice to you and your friends and whoever is taking, your football opinion at face value. This year, we have 79 running backs with at least 25 carries. Salvon Ahmed is 33rd in PFF rushing grade, 71st in missed forced tackles per attempt, 38th in yards per carry, 53rd in yards after contact per attempt. He's fine, but he's just a guy, everybody. Myles Gaskin is the guy that they gave a 3-down roll to for the first 3 months of the season before he got hurt. So, hey, maybe if Gaskin comes back, he's not 100%. We continue to see his backfield split, but not in any universe do I see, a healthy Myles Gaskin coming back and Salvon Ahmed continuing to keep him on the bench. So keep your expectations, just calm. We've gotten a couple useful weeks out of him, and if Gaskin remains sidelined, he'll be a useful kind of low-end volume-induced RB2. Just don't get it twisted. Salvon Ahmed is not the savior of this Miami Dolphins backfield. Dwayne, are you with me on chill out, everybody, on Salvon Ahmed, and then talk about the Jets if you feel like it?
I am. I think the positive for him, right, is that Breida came back and didn't really do anything, which he didn't before, right? So I think basically they've kind of got him in Gaskin's role, but it's like it's like, what's going to happen when Gaskin finally does come back? I don't know. And so, I mean, it's like, if you've picked him up and you really needed a back, great. I mean, you got a guy that you can start. I just don't know that it's going to be for long term. So I'm with you. And so on the Jets, you can time me at 90 seconds or something. So I'll just go, really quickly here. I'm going to give you one number, and it's 326. Any guess what 326 means?
Well, I think I got this. Brashad Perryman air yards over the past few weeks.
Dude, very close, but that's Denzel Mims air yards over. Dude, 2 games. In 2 games, he has 326 air yards. He had 180 last week on an ADOT, Ian, of 25.7 yards per target, and he was targeted on 7 balls. The week before, he was targeted 8 times. So 29 and 22% of the targets. And Joe Flacco, man, he's just pushing the ball down the field. We'll see what happens when Sam Darnold comes back. We know Darnold really loves Jamison Crowder, who, folks, he's playing all the time. He was out there for 95% of the routes. In fact, if you look at the Jets this week, they pretty much went with 11 personnel. 92% of their plays was in a package with 11 personnel. They trailed on 87% of the plays. That's it. I'm done.
Yeah, man, I'm not sure if Flacco hates Jamison Crowder, like, just professionally or if it's personal as well. But, like, this whole, like, Adam Gase offense always featuring a slot receiver until Joe Flacco comes and just starts chucking it downfield, man. He's weirdly made these Jets games, like, pretty watchable over the past few weeks. And for that, we thank you, Mr. Elite Joe Flacco. Next matchup here, we got the Raiders at the Falcons. Finally, a fun game to go through. Opened up as a pick'em. Now we got the Raiders as 3-point favorites after their impressive showing against the Chiefs on Sunday night. Game total sitting at a week high, 56 points. So, Dwain, happy Derek Carr week, man. We've been talking him up on this podcast throughout the year. I did not imagine myself becoming, one of the leaders of the Respect Derek Carr movement, but here we are. And I'm ranked as my QB 12 this week, facing the league's single worst offense and fantasy points per game allowed to opposing QBs. So, just realize, everyone, as someone that has made far too many memes and GIFs, making fun of Derek Carr not being willing to throw downfield in the past, he is now. It's been great. Ever since Henry Ruggs came back in week 5, Carr's deep ball rate of 14.7% ranks 5th at the position over the past 7 weeks. He's throwing downfield more than Mahomes, Rodgers, Ryan, Brady, Josh Allen. Derek Carr likes to throw deep now. It's wild. I don't know why it took, 7-8 years in the league to spark this. He's had, guys like Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, even in better points of his career. Like, he's had weapons throughout his career. Just haven't seen this type of quarterback. So credit to John Gruden for getting this turnaround, man. And even if they haven't used Ruggs like we would all want them to, clearly he has had a big impact on the offense. So great stuff there. And then I want to get your thoughts on this too, Dwain, because Josh Jacobs, even though last week he only had 1 target, it looked like his role actually changed a good amount. I noticed he had 10 snaps as a pass blocker compared to just 1 for Devontae Booker. So even if it didn't happen last week, it does seem like a situation where maybe in DFS, like, you're starting Josh Jacobs regardless, but in DFS land this week, man, might be a situation just lock button Jacobs, because if we're in a situation where he could actually be getting all the pass down work too, we know he can handle it. It's just a matter of getting it. So truly one of the more talented backs in the league with the ball in his hands. And I'm excited, man. So let me know with the Jacobs usage and then hit me with some Falcons goodness.
Yeah, man, I think the key is you got to watch is Jalen Richard active. This week, they just had Jacobs and Booker active, right? So Booker basically takes every 3rd series from Jacobs. But from a standpoint of, what you just talked about, he was out there for 83% of the 2-minute snaps. So before that, he had been 0%, 32%, 0%. So he wasn't getting any of that work. It was all going to Richard. And then if you look at the long down and distance, he actually saw 100% of that this past week. Now they only had 1 snap, so that's kind of weird. But but before that, he had been 0%, 0%, 21%, 0%. Like, he's literally non-existent. And that's the role that Richard would play. So yes, especially if you hear that Jalen Richard is going to be inactive, I think at that point, Jacobs is an absolute lock button. If you hear that Richard is going to be active, I would be concerned that we're going to be back more to the same of what we saw before, where he's hovering right around the 50%, of snaps. He's hovering around, the 30 to 40%, of routes run, not as many targets, et cetera, which he didn't get a ton of targets this week, but the underlyings are all really strong on Jacobs, to your point, this last week. So I think that's what you've got to watch. It's the Jalen Richard, news. And yep. I don't even know why Richard was not active.
He's got a chest injury.
It was a chest injury? Okay, yeah. So you can watch the practice reports on that. And you're probably going to have a pretty good feel well before we get to Sunday if you see he's got a full practice in or not. As far as Atlanta goes, the biggest thing here is I tweeted something on Sunday morning just trying to be nice to Todd Gurley. I know his efficiency stinks, but basically saying, like, look, man, his touches are like RB2. He's in that 20-touch range every single week, and it had been that way for 4 weeks in a row. Until last week. It's how it works, right? That's the rule. As soon as you tweet something, this is what happens. But he had a season low, Ian, 37% of the snaps. A season low, 19% of routes. 0% of the 2-minute offense. Only 20% of the long down and distance. So he had 8 attempts and 1 target. That's just gross. And it stinks because if you look at the matchup this week, right, Vegas can be had on the ground. You could really run on the Raiders. And so it was going to be an opportunity to maybe see Gurley get right. And now you have to be sitting here wondering, okay, and again, because there's another team that's coming out of the bye week. When these teams make these changes coming out of the bye week, it's like it concerns you, right? You're like, okay, is this like the new thing? Because Brian Hill saw a season high, 42% of the snaps. It's not like he did anything with it. He had 4 attempts and 0 targets, right? So you're going to have to just keep an eye on Gurley. It's just 1 week so far, but it could be a trend. The good news on Ridley, 92% of the routes, so it does seem that his foot is fine. He had 29% of the targets on a 17.1 ADOT, 3 targets of 20-plus yards. So, Ridley is a guy, you just fire him up. Hayden Hurst, man, again, it's just another guy that I think continues to go underlooked, but 82%, route run rate on the season. That's elite for a tight end. There's about 6 guys that are over 80%, and he's one of them. So Hayden Hurst is a guy that, if somebody's just not into him, if you can target him, late season target, you're trying to make a push in the playoffs. If the trade window's still open in your league, I love trying to buy Hayden Hurst on the low.
Yeah, I think Hurst could actually be the biggest beneficiary if Julio ends up missing time with his hamstring injury. We've seen Christian Blake, Olamide Zacchaeus, whose name I need to figure out how to say at some point in my life, but not today.
Hurst has 8 targets over 20 yards, dude. Like, he's the only guy in the Gronk's first with 10. He may be at 11 after last night. I have to go look. But you know who else is on that list? So it's Gronk, Andrews, Kelsey, and Hurst. That's it. And so, the guys, all of his underlyings are great. Yep. They just need to target him a little bit more.
Yeah. Hopefully we get those soon. Next matchup, Saints at Broncos. We got the Saints as 6-point favorites. Game total 46 down to 43.5. So look, Taysom Hill went out there. He won the football game. And he looked like, a legit NFL quarterback. I realized he underthrew, Emmanuel Sanders by about 25 yards on that one bomb. But hey, just in terms of the expectations and the jokes people were making in the first quarter, like, we got to tip our hat to Taysom Hill and Sean Payton for going out there and getting a win. I would just say, this is not a situation where we saw him provide more to this offense than what they were getting before. 24 points is the fewest. It's tied for the fewest the Saints have scored all season long. I don't think this was a better version of the Saints offense by any stretch of the imagination, because honestly, it just seemed like we got rid of a bunch of targets, a bunch of fantasy friendly and real life friendly targets to Alvin Kamara, and replaced them with Taysom Hill running around like, a chicken with his head cut off, or just getting a few design carries in the second half, stole both the rushing touchdowns from the 10-yard line or closer. And it's really troubling for Kamara, man, for him not to catch a pass. I get that's not going to happen again, but clearly Hill is in that kind of Josh Allen, the Drew Lock mode where, hey, when things aren't there, they're not going to check the ball down. They're going to scramble, or they're going to chuck it downfield and see what happens out there. This hurts, man. We went from maybe one of the, just happiest quarterbacks in the league to check down to Alvin Kamara to potentially someone that doesn't want to do it at all. So we already have Latavius Murray, playing pretty much half the snaps with Kamara last week. How much of that was Kamara being banged up and also just the overwhelmingly positive game script? We'll see. I think Kamara is going to still be the 60-70% guy more weeks than not, but the usage is concerning, man. And he's still going to be out there in your lineup and everything, but particularly in DFS land, dude, I'm just not looking to back Kamara at his price tag in this offense, because he looks like his 1 week role was a show of what it's normally been. And when we got guys like Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, these dudes that we can fire up for 20 plus carries, what has made Alvin Kamara and in 2019 Christian McCaffrey, just these ridiculously fantasy-friendly assets, is these absurd receiving workloads. So you take that away, and it's not like they've just been constantly making more out of the 12 to 15 carries and other running backs. It's always been those targets and those receptions. Those are the cheat codes in fantasy football, because you're getting a full freaking point for catching the ball behind the line of scrimmage. It's just again, it's a cheat code. It doesn't make sense that it is that way. It is that way, and we've been taking advantage of it. But you take that away, and it's truly concerning for Alvin Kamara. So he's still going to be in everyone's top 5, top 6 running backs. He'll probably be top 3, let's be honest. But I just think that, really keep an eye on this situation, because even though Taysom Hill built a nice little, highlight reel for himself last week, and he's someone that you can start quarterback and, tight end if you don't remove him from ESPN or some craziness going on there, Taysom Hill's fine. He's going to get his production. Just realize, the biggest guy that just got hurt by having Hill under center, definitely Alvin Kamara. Dwayne, scale from 1 to 10, how concerned are you with Kamara, with Taysom under center, and then give me some Broncos goodness.
I'm at a 7 or 8, man. I mean, it really is concerning, because this is an offense. What concerns me is, if you think back, you watch every game. The design plays for Kamara weren't even there. right? So it's almost like
One
Sean
target.
Payton.
Come on.
Yeah, Sean, if you think of all the little tunnel screens, all the stuff like that they run, right? For Kamara. And they didn't do any of that with Taysom Hill. So it's almost like, Sean Payton to some extent is saying, okay, Taysom Hill's ability to do X kind of replaces, right, Kamara's ability to do Y. And so we need to attack these other areas of the field. We don't need to replicate and have two people attacking this same spot. We can have Hill do that, and then now what do we want Kamara to do? But it's very problematic, man. And I think you named a perfect example is Josh Allen. This puts Alvin Kamara's utilization, right, would put him in like the Devin Singletary kind of range. I'm not saying they're the same player, but we don't want to see that, right? We don't want to see that at all, man. Nobody wants to start a running back that gets 10 carries and 1 target. Yeah. It doesn't matter who their name is. You don't want to do it. So I'm very, very concerned. I'm not going to panic yet. Obviously I'm not pulling Kamara from any of my lineups. And in DFS, if I think if the field's going to be off of him, and he's going to have like 2-3% ownership, then I would jump in on Kamara for that. But otherwise, like you said, if I'm in cash lineups or if I think the field's going to be anywhere like around 10%, I'm going to be under the field on the Kamara ownership. I think that's the smart play. So, I mean, if you think about, the Broncos, really there's not a lot that's changed here. I mean, you've got Drew Lock still continuing to struggle, but he managed to make it through the game, after, being in danger of not being able to play. And I know folks, are really, they're pounding on Lock. But to be honest, he really is. If you have fantasy assets with the Broncos, he's the guy you want out there, right? Because he'll keep slinging it. He's going to make mistakes, but he doesn't care. He'll just come back and do it again. He doesn't mind. And that keeps Jerry Jeudy viable. It keeps KJ Hamler viable. It keeps all, is their efficiency great? No. You would like to see a lot more. I mean, if you look at Jerry Jeudy, 30% and 29% of the targets over the last 2 weeks. If you look at his air yards, they're nuts. 181 and 132, right? So 313 air yards just over the last 2 weeks for Jerry Jeudy. You'd hope to see more fantasy production out of that. But the thing is, it's eventually some of those things are going to hit, right? I worry that if Drew Lock leaves the lineup, right, you just lose those down the field type targets, right? And it becomes much more of a check down type offense. This last week, you saw a little bit of a dip in KJ Hamler's snaps, and it was really just because they didn't need to run 11 personnel. They were within 3 points 58% of the snaps, and they led for 20% of the snaps. And Denver's just not used to doing that. They typically are trailing all of the time. Last little quick note, Melvin Gordon III had a really good week. But as far as utilization goes, I mean, he's pretty much settled into a role over these last 3 to 4 weeks. He's going to see 40 to 50% of the attempts. He's going to see 50 to 70% of the 2-minute offense, 60 to 80% of the long down and distance, and he's going to share some of the work down inside of the 5. So Lindsey is not getting any of that work really in the 2-minute or long down and distance. He gets a little bit, and so does Freeman. He'll get out there occasionally. You got to have that third guy. You got to work in. It's insane. So just remember with MG3, He scored some touchdowns this last week. They were in a good game script. He's in a solid spot, but if he's a sell high candidate, to me, I guess is what I'm trying to say in short, because really he is still, he's mostly splitting the work, and it's not a really great offense.
Yeah. I appreciate Drew Lock making, some of these games as entertaining as possible, but not exactly the most fantasy-friendly guy for these other guys to have under center, at least for the backfield, that is. Next matchup here, we got 4 more to go. Thank you, as always, for tuning into the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast and sticking with us, everybody. We got the 49ers at Rams up next. Rams are sitting at 7-point favorites. Game total started at 47, down to 45. So this backfield, we got the 49ers coming off the bye, getting healthier. Kyle Shanahan went into the bye saying he hoped to have both Mostert and Tevin Coleman back for week 12. We got Mostert dealing with an ankle injury right now, Coleman with a knee, but it just depends what's going to happen. And this could be one of the most important situations to watch because as we've seen for pretty much the past decade and a half, or if you want to include Mike Shanahan too, the past, 30 years, and when you have a Shanahan calling plays, we want his running back in fantasy football land. This matchup this week in particular isn't great. If you have these guys, facing this Rams, just Aaron Donald front 7, and you want to just sit out for a week, and chill, I get it. But I will say if Mostert and Tevin Coleman remain sidelined, which doesn't sound particularly likely, don't be afraid to trust that Jerick McKinnon, man. even though he had that dud in week 10, PPR, RB 38. Before that, in 3 starts, he was RB 14, RB 6, and RB 8. Again, doesn't really matter who it is, but if we can identify the lead back in this 49ers offense, it's going to be a fantasy-friendly role. If everyone's active, I'm fine going with Mostert, probably in that RB 20 to RB 24 range. Just a little worried about what the role could look like, but, he has proven himself to be the lead dog when healthy. So Mostert, but just really keep an eye on this situation as we get into the weekend. Last point I would make, seeing some people projecting Jalen Ramsey to be shadowing Deebo Samuel. I don't think that would be the case. And even if it is, it doesn't matter, everyone. The way they use Deebo Samuel, he's just not really even shadowable. I don't know if that's a word, but it is now. And you look back at, what happened in week 6 when they played the Rams, he wasn't shadowed. And he had 6 catches for 66 yards and a score. And it was like the most hilarious 66 yards ever, because I don't know if the ball ever traveled further than like 6 inches out of Goff's hand to give him those pop passes. Maybe he had a screen there. That was the game where he had like 92 yards after the catch and 66 total receiving yards. So, hey, it works, man. He's a running back with the ball in his hands, and I'm not trying to take away anything from him as a route running receiver, but he really is. He's not AJ Brown. There's only one AJ Brown, but if you just look at raw broken tackle numbers from 2019, it was AJ Brown and Deebo Samuel atop the league. So he's dangerous with the ball in his hands, and don't let a shadow matchup that, again, if it happens, isn't really going to be that big of an influence on a snap basis. Change your decision making there. What is going on with the Rams, who are suddenly a pass first offense apparently?
Yeah, man. I have to say one quick thing. Anytime you get Mike Evans against a physical type corner, it's like must watch TV. You don't have to watch. You can literally just watch him and Ramsey. It's the same way obviously with Marshawn Lattimore, and it's even worse because they definitely have some bad blood, between them. But just watching those two guys battle, and they both got each other, different times. But not many receivers have what it's take to really go just be super physical with Ramsey. He's a really strong guy. Not only is he fast and agile, but the strength that guy has for how big he is pretty amazing. So it's fun watching that and watching those guys go back and forth. As far as the Rams go, I know we tried to get excited right around Akers, right? There was an Akers sighting, and we're just kidding. We're just kidding about it. It remains really just a 3-way backfield. He's just kind of getting mixed in here or there. If you look at it, Darrell Henderson's the first down back. He's getting most of those carries, right? Over 50% of those. If you look at Malcolm Brown, he's the guy getting all the long down and distance. He gets all the 2-minute work. But here over the last couple of weeks, he has also taken over 48% of the short down and distance, whereas Darrell Henderson was getting that before. So Malcolm Brown, not a super exciting guy, but if you're just in a really tough spot and you had to plug one of these guys in, he would be the one. If you came to me and said, I just need a floor, which one gives me the best chance in PPR to at least just give me 10 points? I would say Malcolm Brown, right? If you ask me which one would I want to put in because I thought, they gave you the most upside, I think it would still be Henderson. And I do think it's still somewhat of a hot hand approach, right? I think we're seeing that with a lot of these backfields that we've already talked about. You'll notice in the first drive, Ian, if you go look at this, because in the back end stats that we have, you can look at it. First drive, second drive, third drive. You look at that first drive, a lot of these backfields are really evenly split. It's like they're almost, or over the first 2 drives, they're looking at each guy, and then it'll start to split apart from there, like in drives 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, some of that can be dictated, by game script. So for right now, though, the Rams are just stuck in, this purgatory of RBBC times 3. You'd rather just not be playing any of them. They're just a balanced offense, period, right? The receivers, it had been Josh Reynolds who had been the guy who had been on, and Robert Woods had been the guy who had been on the outs. Also, just kidding. 14 targets, 30%. And we know Bobby Trees is always good for a rushing attempt or 2, which is always great for him. So there's just going to be a guy left out every weekend. And so it's really hard to predict when it's going to come. Sometimes it's matchup dependent. Sometimes it's just the way the read and the progressions go. They're all good players, right? Reynolds has shown that he's capable. We know Robert Woods is good. Obviously, Cooper Kupp is a beast. We all know this. If you're playing any of these guys, you just have to know any one of them could really come up with just that 5 to 7 point game each week. But it's tough to bench them because at any point they can give you the 20 to 30.
Yeah, I imagine this is tough for, defenses to game plan against, which, hey, that's Sean McVay's job. So kudos to him. But you're not making it easy on us, man. Not making it easy on the fantasy football analysts of the world. We got to get out of our mother's basements at some point. We got guys like Sean McVay giving this to us. But it is what it is. Next matchup here, we got the Chiefs at the Buccaneers. Kansas City, 3-point favorites. Game total up to 56 after opening at 53. So here we are going into week 12, and Patrick Mahomes is pretty much replicating the same MVP performance performance we saw in 2018. He's been a little bit worse, but it's honestly negligible, man. In 2020, he's at 90.5 PFF passing grade, was at 92.8 in 2018. 8 yards per attempt versus 8.5 yards per attempt. QB rating is at 109 versus 110. Overall, Mahomes is averaging 26.01 fantasy points per game after going for 26.07 back in 2018. It is the same world beater. Maybe we haven't seen the same just absurd counting stats through the air, but he's been making up for it with more of a rushing floor than we've seen really throughout his career. So ever since he got healthy, kind of halfway through that 2019 season, we've seen the stuff he can do on the ground. But it really is just wild, how we're already kind of taking Mahomes for granted. Almost he's in that like LeBron sphere of a guy where he's just putting up absurd numbers and we're just like, yeah, it's Patrick Mahomes. And I believe it was PFF Moo who brought up the point where he's looking at, I think that he was measuring an EPA, but what makes Mahomes so special is that his bad games are like average games. I mean, we see Russell Wilson against the Rams, Aaron Rodgers against the Buccaneers. Like even the best quarterbacks in the league have a down game at some point. And I'm pretty sure PFF Moo's main takeaway, and apologies if I'm messing this up, but I'm pretty sure the main takeaway was that Mahomes literally has not had like a below average game compared to the typical NFL quarterback. So absolutely wild. And, just the level teams have to play to even beat these guys remains ridiculous. So, Tyreek, Kelsey, they're going to continue doing their thing. Kelsey, will he ever finish as anything other than the tight end one the season again? We don't know. Scholars still debate. So, last point I would make with this is just that the backfield, it is, going to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but it's pretty much like we've been saying, man. Like, after those just down weeks, we were not writing him off on this podcast. We were saying, hey, look, he's going to be probably an RB2 more times than not. And yeah, found the end zone a couple times last week, but still got Le'Veon Bell out there stealing away some carries. Darrell Williams is still there, 2-minute back there trusting. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, perfectly fine, RB2 to put out there. Unfortunately, though, that top 5, top 6 ceiling we were hoping for, likely not going to be here in 2020. Dwayne, what's going on with the Buccaneers team, man, that looks like they're the freaking next big thing one week and then just kind of struggle busting the next?
Yeah, I think you just see a quarterback and receivers that are still just not all, 100% in sync. And if you look at Brady, he's different than a lot of these other quarterbacks we talk about, right? Like his game is really built around knowing exactly where the other player is going to be. It's around anticipation. And not to say these other guys aren't, but he's not an ad-lib really kind of quarterback, right? He's playing within a certain kind of scheme. It's different than the scheme he's always played in. He's being asked to push the ball down the field more. Antonio Brown is new to the offense. So I think they're still honestly just working out the kinks. And in some games, things seem to hit on all cylinders. And in other games, it's kind of like, oh, wait, what just happened? It's a situation where all the bad things come out, right, in one game. And to your point, we saw a really good game the week before, a really bad game the week before that, and we're back to a bad game this week. So I think we're just going to continue to deal with that a little bit. It may even out. I think Brady's easily, right, still right in the middle of the QB1 tier just because of his weapons alone. But if you want to talk about Antonio Brown, he's had 8, and 13 targets, right, over the first 3 games. So that is, 5, 8, and 13 targets. So 14%, 21%, 28. And even more interesting, he's not out there for all the routes, right? 61% and 69%, but his targets per route, when he's out there, Brady's looking for him. So targets per route are 30% and 37%, which are both highest on the team. So Godwin still got his 10 targets. This is really the first game in a while where we've seen Godwin not have a finger or a hamstring or some sort of issue bothering him. So it was really good just to see Godwin do that. And he was out there for 99% of the snaps, was in a route on 100% of Tom Brady's dropbacks. So you're going to be doing good with Chris Godwin. And then you also have Mike Evans, right? And he's still pretty much out there all the plays too. 95% and 92% of has a route run rate over the last 2 weeks with AB still getting work. So 11 targets and 8 targets. And he definitely gets more of the looks, down in the end zone area. He's the guy that obviously Brady likes there. So he's still seeing the high leverage targets. And the biggest thing really for Evans over the last few weeks, because a lot of folks, are talking about, he's having this late season, kind of boom, if you will. And the biggest thing is that he's getting to play in the slot. Whereas before he never was. He was always lining up outside and going deep. And so I think basically they felt bad that they weren't getting him the ball enough and all these other guys were getting the ball. But over the last 3 weeks, 45%, 45%, and 34% of his routes have come from the slot. And he's seen 6 targets over that time period, 2, 2, and 2 out of the slot. So those are targets he just wasn't getting before. So you take those games where he was seeing 4 or 5, now you add another 2 with him working inside where Brady likes to go, and it's just helping Mike Evans out. So I think, again, this is going to be another offense where you're going to have to start them all, Ian, and you're going to have to start them all every week unless you really have a better option. Because if you don't, you're going to start them on the week they have a dud, and then you're going to bench them on the week they blow up. Right. So the good news is the Bucs defense is not playing as good as it was early on. So they're mostly in shootouts right now. The secondary for the Bucs, the outside cornerbacks were really like a strength of their team early on in the season. The pass rush is still there, but their coverage is not where it was, in those first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season, which is opening the door for them to need to just continue to be in pass mode all the time.
Yeah, clearly a team that still needs to come together to some extent. And hey, they have as good of a chance to do so, if not better than almost anyone else. Because look, tough matchup against the Chiefs here. I think we'd all, expect them to probably drop this one. But then week 13 bye, and they finish the season with the Vikings at home, at the Falcons, at the Lions, and the Falcons at home again. So Brady is not going to have to play a cold weather game, man, until, January at some point with the way this schedule's shaping up. So we'll see. Could, would make a lot of sense if the Buccaneers are able to go into the playoffs on quite the hot streak. 2 more games, everyone. Quick shout out to our sponsors first, though. All first-time depositors at Monkey Knife Fight that put at least $20 in their account while using promo code PFF or receive a free PFF Edge annual subscription. That's a $40 value for just $20, ladies and gentlemen. And you'll get the opportunity to turn that $20 into even more money playing daily fantasy and prop games at one of the fastest-growing fantasy sports sites in the USA and Monkey Knife Fight. So go to Monkey Knife Fight, deposit your $20 with promo code PFF today to receive your free PFF Edge annual subscription. Sunday Night Football, we got the Bears at the Packers. Green Bay sitting as 8.5 point favorites. Game total at 45. So Bears, we don't really know who's under center. We got Nick Foles banged up. We got Mitch Trubisky banged up. Doesn't matter who's out there. I don't really know. And it's just, the whole thing is just, rough spot for Allen Robinson. And it sucks that here we are again. We were hanging our hat on Nick Foles maybe being the best, quarterback of his career, as laughable as that is. It probably is still true, especially if we just take Foles out. I mean, it's definitely true if we take Foles as his entire career, but even just what Foles has put, on paper in 2020 specifically, still might be the best QB play A-Rob has had, sadly enough. So tough for him, man. If it's going to be, back to Trubisky or Foles, either way, it's going to be one of them. A-Rob, he's still someone you're going to have in your starting lineups, but, this guy that we were really hoping he could be, this top 8 wide receiver throughout the year, he still had some big weeks, but it's going to be tough. Probably going to have shadow coverage from Jair Alexander, and, while shadow coverage isn't something that we should, be a reason to start, your 32nd ranked wide receiver over your 8th ranked wide receiver, that's not going to be an easy day for A-Rob in that matchup. So whole lot of negatives going for him. I think really, other than Allen Robinson, the only other guy that we can even start this week is Dave Montgomery if he's able to clear the concussion protocol. Guys, he is the definition of a volume-based RB2. And we use this term a lot. And literally, it's just a nice way of saying that this guy is nothing special as a ball carrier, but he's getting the volume that we're looking for in fantasy football land. And that's what he has been. Since Tariq Cohen went out of the picture, we got 5 games with Montgomery working as the lead back, 80% snaps in every single game, and finished as the PPR RB 27, 13, 14, 24, and 19. So I don't think we're getting a top 12 performance this week, but I would be surprised if he finishes outside the top 24 as long as he has this sort of robust role. Dwayne, him with some Packers goodness.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for Montgomery is someone along the line, right, in his coaching told him that the end zone is like on the sideline. So he just goes, he runs to the side all the time. He's like, "Coach, I'm going to score." They're like, "No, run the other way." It's like kids at a soccer game. So Allen Lazard returned to the lineup. MVS remained in the lead role as the wide receiver 2 with 88% of the routes, a slight dip from his 94% and 98%. But I think really MVS has carved out his role as the field stretcher, Ian. So I think we're going to continue to see him. So Lazard got to work out of the slot with 54%. In fact, if you're looking at the Packers this week, 75% of their plays came out of 11 personnel. That's by far the most in the season. Their previous high was 55%, right? So that's really good for, Lazard. That's good for Scantling. We know Devontae Adams is going to be out there, but for the other 2 guys, it helps them down the field a little bit more. The other guy that has got a really solid trend, and I think it may have just been injury related, Ian. We saw a great start to the season just out of the blocks with Robert Tonyan, and then he just kind of cooled off, but he was dealing with a couple of different injuries. And if you look at him over the last few weeks, his trends are really good. So Over the last 3 weeks, here are his routes run per dropback: 54%, 71%, and last week 81%. So again, you heard us talk about 80% earlier with Hayden Hurst. Tanyan, we'll see if he can stay above that number, but 2 weeks in a row over the 70% mark puts him in the startable conversation. He's had 4 and 5 targets over the last 2 weeks, but most importantly, those are coming from none other than Aaron Rodgers, right? So those are really high value targets. I would like to do a study at some point, like what are the value of targets, right, from different quarterbacks. That sounds like something we need to do over the off season. But we know, from a standpoint of we watch the games, Tanyan's targets are more valuable than, say, Ryan Finley's targets, right? The targets from Ryan Finley. So that's about it with the Packers. The only other thing I would say is Aaron Jones, right? So I know a lot of people are bent out of shape. They're upset about Aaron Jones. I hear a lot of, oh man, look at his snaps, look at his routes, look at his carries. This is what Aaron Jones has been against since week 1. This is who you drafted. And if you didn't know that, well, sorry. He's been an efficiency play, right? He's been an efficiency play. And all the concerns we've ever had about Aaron Jones has never been talent. It's just been that they like to rotate backs, and it's finally hitting. Just like last year, we had concerns, about the Ravens offense, right? Could Lamar Jackson really pass well enough, to keep them moving? Could they not run the ball enough to keep passing options viable? Same kind of thing. We're seeing that all of a sudden the outlier season goes away, and you're having to deal with reality. And that's really what we're dealing with Aaron Jones. He's still squarely in the RB1 conversation. You got to start him every single week. He can still give you that 100 yards, 3 touchdown game at any moment. He's still involved, in the passing game. Is Jamal Williams a pain in the ass? Yes. Should Jamal Williams be getting half the snaps and half of that work? No. We all agree. But Matt LaFleur doesn't, right? And we don't have any say in the matter, so you just got to live with it at this point.
And it's not like Jamal Williams is the league's worst running back. It's just that Aaron Jones, he could be the league's best running back if he had enough workload. Like, we don't know. Probably not the best, but either way, anyone's idea of a top tenor, and the fact that he's not getting that sort of workload has been the frustrating part. Last game, everybody, Monday Night Football. We got the Seahawks at the Eagles. Seattle opened up as 3-point favorites. Went up to 5.5 because, hey, they're facing the freaking Eagles. Game total of 53, down to 51. So a couple things here. With the Seahawks, first of all, Russ hasn't been cooking quite as much lately. But I don't know if that's necessarily, a philosophical change with the offense, or if it's just, a little bit game script, or if it's a little bit that, hey, Russell Wilson is down to run again, everybody. In 2018 and 2019, he only averaged 23 and then 21 rushing yards per game. He's at 36.7 right now. That's what he hit in 2017. But before then, we'd have to go back the first 4 years of his career to find Russ running around this much. He already has more rushing yards in 2020 than he did in 2019. So even though we might be seeing a slightly less pass-happy Russ moving forward, man, he's picking up these fantasy-friendly rushing yards, and he's going to continue to be, a top 3 quarterback on a weekly basis because of that. Now with the backfield, because look, we're starting DK Metcalf, we're starting Tyler Lockett every single week. Again, it's not, even though we had a couple weeks where it was, Metcalf or Lockett, these guys keep going back to well with both of these. And I hate just the, critiques about Tyler Lockett sometime, where I know he finally had just like a regular solid game and not a complete boom. But another offseason study we got to look at, man, what is more valuable with a wide receiver? Do you want someone giving you those 15 points every week, or do you want the guy giving you 30 points or 3 points? Because I don't know, man, having those 2 week winning explosions, I think, are a little bit underrated. So another question to kind of answer in the offseason, because I see people floating that around like, oh no, this isn't good. It's not even useful to get these 2 explosions. Obviously, no, that's very useful, but I think it might even be more useful than, your type that just doesn't quite have that in their range of outcomes. But main event here is this backfield, because Pete Carroll has said that Chris Carson is expected to be back. Now, it is Pete Carroll saying that, so we need to take that with a massive grain of salt, based on what his kind of historical track record is when talking about his players' injuries. But, we got to keep an eye on this, because Rashad Penny is allegedly going to be practicing next week, and Carlos Hyde has looked fine enough when he's been out there and healthy this year. So Chris Carson's workload earlier in the year, he was the lead back, and he was fine because he was getting receptions and he was scoring a lot inside of, the league's highest scoring offense, or at least they were, going into last week. But he actually played fewer than 60% of the offensive snaps in all but one of the team's first 5 games. So, hey, if he's healthy, he's going to be a top 15 option at the position, if not top 10. But just realize, it might be a little bit more like a 15 touch workload per week, as opposed to that 20 plus that we were seeing last year. And there is even a chance that we see Hyde or Rashad Penny, if he can ever get healthy, kind of make this into a committee. So, hey, Carson's one of the funnest guys to watch in the league. He runs so freaking hard. They love him, and he's going to be their lead back. Just not sure if that lead back role is quite as big as we saw in past years, with Russ now both throwing more often and running more often as well. Dwain, what's going on with, an Eagles team that I think we all thought at some point would kind of break out of this funk, but here we are in week 12, and it's not looking much better.
Well, man, if there's ever an opportunity to get your passing game going, it's when you face the Seahawks.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at their rank against wide receivers, it's insane. It's a plus 15.8 PPR points versus what receivers average coming in against the Seahawks. So to give you some perspective, the next closest team is 5.8 points above average. So it's like you have the Seahawks and then you have everyone else. So if you're in DFS, like it's fire up your Jalen Reagor, it's fire up your Travis Fulgham. They're both out there plenty. Each of them had 95% of the routes. It's just turning into more of a balanced offense in the passing game, Ian, because they're healthier now. So you've got Reagor, you've got Fulgham, you've got Goddard, you got Miles Sanders involved in the backfield. Sanders is the guy that I would just mention to folks. You know, I know he hasn't had the blow-up game yet since he's come back. Yes, I know the Eagles look really terrible, but his utilization is right there in the RB1 mix, right? And that's what you're looking for. You know, he's seen 72% and 60% of the snaps. Routes are right around the 50% range. Targets, 14% and 15%. So that's 5 each of the last 2 weeks. That's really good. And he's getting first read targets, which we've talked about in the past. That's really good for running backs because typically you're just a check down. So they're designing plays for him. And then if you look at his work in the running game, 63% and 64% of the carries. So 15 and 16. So this is a guy that's going to be right around 22, I would say range 18 to 22 touches per week. You know he has big play ability. Their offensive line has been playing better and better despite how run blocking, pass blocking, not as much. Let me qualify that. Run blocking, it's actually been decent. So Sanders he's a buy low guy, and he's a guy that really should be owned in DFS. I think most people actually will look at the receivers for DFS, and he could kind of be the way that you pivot off of some of those plays, depending on what ownership looks like. And you can get a back that's really not quite bell cow, but just below that, Ian. But he has that big playability. So I like all these guys. And Dallas Goedert, man, 98% of the routes last week. We talked about 80% being good. This dude was out there for 98% of the routes. So Dallas Goedert is an absolute, you got to have him in your lineup every single week. There's pretty much, unless you have Kelsey, Andrews, who am I missing here, Ian? I mean, I'm pretty much starting
Waller.
Waller, yeah. Anybody else?
That's it,
because anybody else he's above right now. I'm starting him over pretty much everyone else. He needs to be in lineups. He should be owned in every single league. If I haven't looked at his pricing this week, but it was insanely low last week, like 3,800, on DraftKings. So if he's still low, he definitely needs to be owned. Even if he's one of those guys that even if it's going to be where the chalk is, you can beat the chalk in other places. You don't have to try to do it on with Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, we've been keeping the faith with Goddard, and good reason for it, getting that late game touchdown last week. I love the Miles Sanders call. I mean, look, I've been sending out the helicopters lately. We got some issues we're working through with the union and insurance and all that kind of stuff. But if I was going to send one out last week, it was going to be Miles Sanders. Obviously, that would have been gone crashing down. But I do just think, his usage is going up. And anytime you have a player, of his ability getting, again, that 18 to 20 touches per week, we're going to see him start to get in the end zone more and more often here moving forward. Somebody has to go in the end zone at some point for the Philadelphia Eagles. Might as well be Miles Sanders. That is going to do it, everybody. Thank you for sticking around with us and listening to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you, Dwain, for taking the time to talk with me. As always, man, everyone make sure you follow Dwain on Twitter at Dwain McFarland. He is Context Matters. And Dwain, tell the people where they can find one of the best fantasy pieces on the internet, the Utilization Report.
Yeah, man, at Pro Football Focus, of course, and it will be up tomorrow. You can also find it at Establish the Run. So we have it's kind of a joint effort that we have going between PFF and all those cool guys over at ETR. And you can also find me at the Fantasy Football Hustle, which is the podcast that I do with Brian Drake. We do it every Tuesday night. So if you guys haven't heard that, give it a listen.
Good stuff all around. Yeah, gotta love our ETR fam. That's going to do it, everybody. Thank you, Dwain. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm Ian Hartitz. He is Dwain. This has been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And until next time, take care, everybody.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.